in this video, we'll be going over guard in the Swift programming language. So guard is essentially a better way to use if-else statements and allows us to check our unwrap optionals a lot simpler. So let's go over an example. So let's create a function, divide, let's call it divide, and we'll take in the dividend, and it'll be a int, or let's make that a double, and I'll take in the divisor, which will also be a double, but we can't divide by 0 or else app will get an error. So we can use the if statement to check if the divisor is not 0, but there's a better way. So we can do guard. So basically guard and divisor is not equal to 0.0. So if guard's just saying that if this is true, so if this is true and else, so if that's not true, then run what's here, run what's in here. We'll add another one here. So if this is not true, then we're going to run this. So if it's not true, let's just return, or let's actually print. Let's print error. And so basically, if it's guarding against this, and now we can just normally divide. So now we can just print. Okay, so we have to return. So let's just return an error. Else, let's return dividend divided by the divisor. Dividend divided by divisor. So let's run our code and see. Dividend. Okay, and we also have to make our function to be able to give a string. And since it will be a string, we'll put this into a string, but then we can use an escape sequence. We'll remove that. Now let's do divide and let's give it 30. We'll do a 6. So let's print the value of that. And here we get a 5. Now let's run. Let's put 0 here and let's see what happens. And we get the error. Great. So now let's go into more advanced examples and a few more use cases, including the use with optionals. So our first exercise is that we have to create a function, func, and calculate area. So the function takes in 2 double parameters, so x, and it'll be a double, and y, which will also be a double. And it's going to return an optional double, so we don't know, it could be a nil sometimes, so we don't know if we'll always get a value or not. Now we have to write a guard statement at the beginning of the function that verifies that the parameter is greater than 0. So guard. So we're going to check guard. Let's do if x is greater than 0 and y is greater than 0. Let's do, so if it's not, then since we're guarding against that, we return a nil. So now let's calculate the area. So we're basically guarding against values that are not greater than 0. And we'll just return x times y. Let's call the function now with some positive numbers. Calculate area. And let's do 20 times 5. Now, since it's returning, let's print the value it returns. Great, it gives us 800, which is an optional value. Now let's this time do something with negatives. So negative 80 times negative 15. And we get nil as expected. Now we have to create a function that adds two optional integers as parameters and returns an optional integer. Okay, so let's create a function first called add. It takes two optional integers. So we'll just do int 1 and then so it takes in two optional integers, so we would do int and then int 2, let's put a t here, and let's say int, it's optional, and it returns an optional integer too, so it returns another optional integer. And we should use one guard statement to unwrap both optional parameters and return nil in the guard body if one or both of the optionals don't have a value. If both parameters can be successfully unwrapped, then return their sum. So to unwrap using guard, we would do guard, and then we would do let, and let's let int 1 equal to int 1. Also let's actually rename this. Let's rename this as int 1 like that. Let's int 2 equals int 2. So else, did like before, we will return a null, so nil, and this essentially unwraps both parameters. So they're unwrapped into int 1 and int 2, and now we have to add for the zoom and return their sum. Okay, so we would just return int 1 plus int 2. Okay, now let's call this and see what happens. Let's print the add of 5 and 3. Now next time, let's make one parameter nil. So, okay, so it seems we're getting an error. Okay, so this is not a capital I, this is a lowercase. Great, so we have the optional 8 from adding these two, and then the nil that we were expected to get. Now we have another task, so we're going to work with UIKit objects, and we need to unwrap optionals to handle user input. For example, the text field initialized below have text properties that are types string, optional. Write a function that, given the below code, called create user. So you have to write a function called create user, that takes no parameters and returns the optional user int object. Write a guard statement at the beginning of the function to unwrap the values of each of the text fields property. Okay, so we could do guard let, and we'll do first name is equal to user dot first. So each of the text fields, text properties. Each. So we'll have to go to the text field. Okay, and then text property. So okay, and then return nil if values are successfully unwrapped after the guard statement. Okay. So let's try user.first name. Does that seem to work? So we can't call user because we're not using it. So fields text property. So I'm assuming we have to use these. So let's actually just call this here, and let's put that over here. this should work. Now let's do let, and we'll do a similar thing. We actually don't need to use, or we could use let, and another one, instead of 3. And then else, we'll return the nil. So next one is last name. And then the last one would be age. And we'll get this from last name text field. And we'll get this from the age text field. So if none of them are nil, then we can successfully, we have unwrapped the values and create and return an instance of a user. So let's create an instance of a user. So we'll do say user is equal to user, and then so first name is equal to first name, last name is equal to last name, and age is equal to age. And let's return our user. Let's see how well this goes. Okay, so it seems that we are accessing, we forgot to make it a variable, and let's see if there's any other errors. Okay, so we can even make this a let. Now let's unwrap now let's call the function you made above. So we're supposed to make this above technically. So now let's call the function you made above and capture the return value. So let's print create, so let's call create user. Now, and capture the return value, unwrap the user with standard optional binding, and print statement, print, okay. So say user is equal to create user. And now we can unwrap user using standard optional binding. So to use standard optional binding, let's first make this a variable, and let's make this a user optional type. So this should make it unwrapped, and now we will print we'll print each of its properties. So we'll print the first name, last name, etc. So we'll do user dot first name, and it automatically adds the question mark. And we'll do last name too, age. So okay, and since it's optional, we would have to unwrap the unwrapped properties. So to solve the issue of getting optional, we can use an if let. So if let first name is equal to, and then user dot first name, then we can also have this in here. We can just print user first name. Let's do the same for the other two parameters. Set this as last name, and then age and user's age. Let's call this by using last name and age. So this should remove the optional, and it did. Let's continue. So now we're going to create a workout struct, and our context is that in the exercise on optionals, we created a failable initializer for a workout struct that would only initialize workout if the start time and end time were further apart than 10 seconds. We'll now create the same failable initializer, only with a guard statement to check that the start and end times aren't too close together. Create a workout struct that has the properties start time and end time of type double. Okay. So we'll check if they're within 10 seconds apart using guard statement. If they are, the initializer should fail. Otherwise, it should set the properties accordingly. So to create a failable initializer, first let's create our workout struct. And it has two properties, start time. So var start time and an end time. Now we're going to create a failable initializer. So in it, question mark, so it's optional. And to initialize it, we would need the start time again, which is double, and the end time. So inside our initialize, let's use a guard. So guard, now we're going to make sure that end time minus start time is greater than 10. I'll add parentheses. So if it's not, then we'll return a nil. But if it is, then we will return, actually we'll just initialize the struct. So we will do self dot start time is equal to start time, and then self dot end time is equal to end time. Now let's see what's happening. Okay. Now we have to leaf test this initializer. I guess we're not testing it right yet. So imagine a screen where the user inputs a meal that they have eaten. The user taps the save button without adding any food. You might want to prompt to the user they haven't actually added anything. Using the food struct and text fields provided below, create a function called log food that takes no parameters and returns an optional food. So let's create a function called log food. It takes no parameters but returns an optional food. So it returns an optional food object, and inside the body of the function, use a guard statement to unwrap the text property of food text field and calories text field. So we'll use guard let, and let's call this food, and then that'll be equal to food property dot text. We'll do the same thing with calories, which will equal calories dot text. So else, so if they are nil, then we will return nil. Okay, let's see. Now, in addition to unwrapping calories text field, you'll need to create and unwrap a new variable that initializes an int from the calories text field. If any of this fails, return nil. After the guard statement, create and return a food object. Okay, so now let's use a if let, and we'll call this calories as int, and we'll set that equal to the int value of calories. So if it successfully converts it to an integer, then we can now create our food object, or we can store it as our calories of int. So if let and calories of int will be equal to this, and I believe that we're just duplicating it because it's the same thing that will happen. Now let's create. So else and nil. Now let's return our food object. So we're going to return food, and it takes in the name, which is our food that we stored here, and it takes an int, which is calories as int. Okay, so it seems that so since this is stored locally, this is actually not part of the scope. So we can use a guard for this too. So guard let and else, then we will return nil here. So we can remove our else statement here, and we'll return nil. Now this should be able to accurately return nil if one of these are nil, or if we can't convert it to an int. So should we call our log food function? I guess it's not necessary. And capture return. Okay, now we're doing. So we're going to unwrap the food object with standard optional binding and print the statement about food using each of its properties. So let's do if let, and we're going to create a food object. So we could call this food, and if that's equal to, I'm going to call log food. So if it returns something, then we are going to print, wrap the food object with and print the statement about the food using each of its properties. So print, then let's say we'll do food dot name as, we'll do the number, so food dot calories. Banana has 23 calories. Now go back and change the text in calories text field to string that cannot be converted to a number. Okay, let's make that like that. What happens in that case? So let's print if we change to a string that cannot be converted to a number, then we get no output. Great, we have completed guard, and see you in our next Swift lesson, which is about scope.